Hey, everybody. How's it going? It's Steve Van Tassel back at you for Dynasty Owner here. And we're going to talk about something that we've talked about the last couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago, we discussed stacking, and we discussed stacking quarterbacks and tight ends. And last week, we discussed quarterbacks and wide receivers. If you haven't checked out those articles and videos, you can check out the articles on dynastyowner.com. And the videos are here on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're on YouTube, please be sure to smash the like button. Otherwise, please be sure to listen and give us a good rating. But today we talked about those stacks, and we kind of left it as a foregone conclusion, as a fact that you should probably stack players. But the question is, should you stack? I mean, to paraphrase and steal a line from William Shakespeare, to stack or not to stack. And that is the question. And the thing is that people will tell, some fantasy analysts will tell you to stack, others will say not to stack. If they say to stack, they'll say, oh yeah, I had Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes last year and I won my league. But they won't tell you about the other league that they were in where they stacked Matt Ryan and Julio Jones and came in 7th place. Or they won't tell you about the league that they tried to stack Teddy Bridgewater and DJ Moore and didn't do so well either. So it's kind of something that we should sort of look at and find some data and look at to see whether this is a good idea or not. Do you stack a couple of players on one team and try to get those extra points when they throw a touchdown, when the quarterback throws a touchdown to the receiver? Or do you kind of not do that and you kind of have the best guys you can find from different teams? So basically to stack or not to stack. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about that this week. And so now the first thing we want to go over is the fact that we're going to show some data, and we're going to show data on people who won their league in 2020. And really the only place you can find this sort of stuff is on Dynasty Owner. I mean, you're not going to find data on ESPN or CBS or Yahoo, Sleeper, My Fantasy League, anywhere else really that can tell you, here's how many people who won their league stacked a player and here's what players they stacked. I mean, in addition to having real NFL salaries, providing the best possible GM experience for Dynasty that you can get out there, Dynasty Owner provides information like this to help you win your league this year coming up and in future years. So, another different thing. And something else that's different is we have the chase for the ring. And as I've discussed the last couple of weeks, our chase for the winner in 2020 was Victor and his team, Barbie Kilgore. He had a 3-person stack. He had Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and Tyreek Hill. Worked out great for him. He only spent 28% of his salary cap on them. He had $80.5 million left to build the rest of his team around this stack, and he was the best in Dynasty Owner last year. He won the ring, and that's kind of what we're all going for. But the question is, should you do it? And we've got some data for that. And just as a caveat, we're going to talk about this data. All the data is sort of, because it's hard to do all year data. So what I did was I looked at just the playoffs. So you had to get your team into the playoffs and make it into the Final Four. And we talked about whether the team stacked players in the final 2 weeks of the playoffs, in weeks 15 and 16 in those Dynasty Owner playoffs. So here we go. And the answer to the question of to stack or not to stack is yes. It's actually a more qualified yes than that, because it appears that the data shows that you should be stacking your players. And so when we looked at if teams had any playoff stack in 2020, we see that we were able to analyze most of the winners. Some of them were unable to do because they changed that people sold their team or changed ownership or maybe orphaned them if they did that. So we weren't able to look at all of them. But the teams we're able to look at, we find that just over half, 52% of the playoff team, our winners, used the stack in the playoffs. But it increases a little bit as you talk about the top 25. There, 56% of those teams stacked a player. And then in the top 10, it's up to 60%. So 6 out of 10 of the top 10 of the chase teams had a stack. And so now this definition could be a little generous because I included quarterback or running back stacks. And the teams could have utilized a stack in either playoff week or both. They could have used both. but they could have just used it in 1 week or the other. And then the other thing, and another Dynasty Owner innovation, is that you have a starting lineup and a bench. And so this stack could have been spread across both those things. You could have had a starting quarterback and have a wide receiver on the same NFL team sitting on your bench, still getting points, 20% last year and 25% this coming year. But, those are things that make it a little different. But even with this generous definition, we had stacks that weren't included. And that's where if teams drafted and utilized the stack early in the season, but couldn't use it in the playoffs. I mean, in theory, they drafted a stack. They wanted to do it. They wanted to do stacking, but they just couldn't. And that's if folks were derailed by injury. You got your Dak Prescott, who was great for the first 5 weeks and then went down to injury. If you stacked him in like Amari Cooper or CeeDee Lamb or even Michael Gallup, you're probably doing great for the first 5 weeks, and maybe you struggled after that and didn't do so well and didn't make the finals of the playoffs or win your league. Another thing that could happen is it could have been ended by suspension. Will Fuller, for the example here, Fuller got suspended, and if you had that stack of him with Deshaun Watson, which was a very cheap, affordable stack last year, that was ended at about week 11. I think it was week 11 where he got suspended. So what were the most common stacks here? If people did stack players in Dynasty Owner, what were the most common ones? And what we found is, not surprisingly, that the quarterback wide receiver stack is the most common. In terms of the league winners, it was actually 44% of the league winners stacked a wide receiver and a quarterback. For tight ends, it was 36%, and running backs is 28%. And if you do some quick math, you'll realize that adds up to over 100%. That's because some teams like Victor, who won the ring, stacked more than one. So it adds up to more than 100%. But you look at the top 20 teams who finished in the top 25 who did a stack, and 3/4 of them had a wide receiver quarterback stack. And if you go to the top 10, we had 80% of those teams do that. So very, very interesting. So the most common stack was the wide receiver quarterback stack. And not surprisingly, out of those stacks, the most common one, the individual stack, was the Mahomes Tyreek Hill one, along with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. Out of the quarterback tight end stacks, very unsurprising that it was Mahomes and Kelsey. So while you're doing a stack, you also have to pick the right stack, and that right stack will get you to hopefully to win your league, and then maybe get you into the contention for the chase for the ring. Now, we wanted to produce some other stacking facts, some other interesting things that I found from looking at the data. So we had here some 3-player stacks. Victor wasn't the only one who did a 3-player stack. We had another team who finished 7th. They had the Packers 3-way stack. They had Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, and Davante Adams. A little different because they had a running back. Another team that did that, but spread that across sort of one of what we call the split stack. Was the 11th place finisher in the chase, the Swamp Donkeys. They had Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams in their starting lineup, and they had Robert Tonyan on their bench, the tight end. And some people stacked in 1 week, but not the other, which was interesting. And then some league winners had what we call the bench stack, which is different. Another different thing for Dynasty Owner, where maybe they had drafted a couple of guys to think that they could be their starter, but they didn't perform so well, so they ended up using them on their bench. About 20% of the stacks we saw in week 16 were bench stacks, and about 17%, or 1 in 6, in week 15 were bench stacks. And then overall, about 1/4 of all stacks were split. Common one I saw was kind of having Kyler Murray with Christian Kirk. You started Kyler Murray; he was your starting quarterback, but Kirk kind of was on a lot of benches. So that's kind of some interesting facts about stacking. So basically, what did we find out? We found out that stacking is a good thing. More winners than not stacked than other things. So I can't believe I forgot to